crack. The sound of palm meeting cheek echoed off marble and glass. The room froze mid-laughter, the chandelier trembling in its own reflection. Your mother's tray clattered, silverware skidding across the oak floor. The Millionaire's guests chuckled, not from humor, but from habit, the way people do when power changes air pressure. You were 17 standing beside her, your Sunday shirt still starched from church that morning. You'd come only to drop off her lunch bag, maybe glimpse the inside of the house that owned 3 counties. But the man in the Armani vest, Benedict Crow, saw you before you saw him. Didn't know help came with offspring, he said, swirling his drink. What's your name, boy? You answered quietly. He grinned wider. Poker night, he said. How about a little fun? Let's see if the Maid's son can handle real stakes. The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It was surgical. Each chuckle cut something unseen. The mansion smelled of wealth and arrogance, cigar smoke, imported whiskey, and the faint scent of old polish clinging to every surface. You'd seen mansions before on screens and postcards, but nothing prepared you for the weight of this one, the kind built not just with money, but with lineage. You sat at a table meant for kings, your fingers brushing the felt edge. Across from you, Crow leaned back, his gold watch flashing like a challenge. Let's start with small stakes, he said. Say, 1 month's salary for your mother. The crowd stirred. Some smiled. One woman, eyes soft, pearls steady, looked away. You swallowed. Sir, don't worry, he cut in. It's just a joke. Unless, of course, you think you're too good to play? That line wasn't an invitation. It was a trap. You looked at your mother. She shook her head almost imperceptibly, but the weight of her gaze said more. Survive the moment, then walk away. Still, you sat down. The first hand was mercy. 2 low pairs, a bluff and a laugh. They didn't expect you to win, didn't even care about the cards. The room's amusement came from the sight of a boy pretending to belong. Tell me, one of the guests said, your mom ever teach you poker or just polishing? Laughter again. Cameras lifted subtly, phones recording behind cocktail glasses. You smiled faintly. My father taught me. The words cut through the noise. Crow raised a brow. Oh? And what did he do, son? He played cards for people who thought the game was simple. The room stilled for half a beat before laughter returned, heavier now, forced. But one of the men at the corner shifted uneasily, studying you longer than the rest. You remembered your father's voice, not loud but certain, whispered under dim motel lights years ago. Never chase luck, son. Chase behavior. Money is just how they keep score. That night came back like a smell. Cheap bourbon, the rustle of cards, the steady patience of a man who never lost his temper, only his time. You looked at Crow's hands, the way he tapped the table when bluffing, the small twitch in his jaw when stakes rose. You said nothing, just watched. Round after round he toyed with you, stacking chips like monuments. Each loss was a laugh for them, a lesson for you. Then as the clock struck midnight, the game shifted. The air changed. You noticed something? The same bronze seal on a folder near Crow's chair. It bore the logo of Blackstone Holdings, your late father's former employer. The one that swallowed his small business years ago in a merger. You traced the edge of your glass, pretending not to notice. But your silence wasn't defeat, it was reconnaissance. Crow leaned forward. Last hand, double or nothing. Let's make it interesting. He tossed a black centurion card onto the table, its sheen catching the chandelier's light. Winner takes it all, deal? Your mother gasped softly. Sir, please, he's just... Crow snapped his fingers, quiet. The boy's learning about consequence. You met his gaze, deal. The dealer shuffled. Cards slid across felt like whispers. Crow's smile widened as he checked his hand. You checked yours. Nothing but low numbers, worthless, unless... You remembered your father's rule. The table isn't the enemy. The ego is. You pushed all your chips forward, all in. The room erupted with laughter again. Crow mirrored you, grinning. This'll be over quick. He revealed his hand, full house. Applause broke. You turned yours over. Nothing but a straight flush born of quiet patience and simple math. The laughter stopped. Crow froze, lips parting. Beginner's luck, he muttered. But the room knew better. The phone cameras stayed steady. You stood slowly, your chair scraping the floor like a verdict. Thank you for the lesson, sir. And as you turned, the bronze folder at his side caught the light again, its seal matching the faint engraving on the platinum pin tucked beneath your collar. glinted just once like a whisper of storms to come. But what came next silenced the entire room. The silence that followed that final hand stretched too long to be polite. Crow's smirk faltered, replaced by the thin, trembling grin of a man who couldn't tell whether he'd just lost a bet or been played. You didn't move. You let him sit there staring at the cards, his glass still halfway to his mouth. Around the table, whispers rippled. Some guests chuckled nervously, trying to revive the laughter that had once filled the room. But it didn't return. The power had shifted, so subtly, so completely, that even the chandelier light seemed to tilt toward you. Your mother reached for your sleeve, her hand trembling. "Let's go," she whispered. But Crow wasn't done. His pride was louder than his reason. "Not so fast," he said, standing abruptly, his chair screeching against the marble. "You think this means something? You got lucky. I've seen boys like you before, mouth full of attitude, pockets full of nothing." His voice rose, and his guests, his audience, watched with a strange hunger. The humiliation he'd orchestrated was no longer a game. It was now self-preservation. You didn't reply. You simply picked up the black centurion card he'd thrown onto the table. The weight of it felt strange, too deliberate to be mere plastic. "You said winner takes it all," you said quietly. "I believe that's what you said." He laughed sharply, but the sound cracked. "You wouldn't even know where to use that card. You slipped it into your pocket." "Maybe not," you said, "but I know what a promise sounds like." Someone near the back started recording openly now. The lenses multiplied. Eyes behind cameras, phones tilted like mirrors catching truth. Crow realized too late what he'd built around himself. A theater of his own arrogance. Your mother tugged again, her eyes pleading. But the man wasn't finished degrading her. "You think this is over? You're fired," he spat at her. "Both of you. Don't ever come near my house again." His words hit like stones. The other guests looked away, some uncomfortable, some entertained. She bowed her head. "Yes, sir," she murmured, her dignity pressed under his boots. You felt something inside you crack, not rage, but something colder. The kind of calm that builds when rage has no oxygen left. Crow turned to his butler. "Show them out." But before the man could move, a voice came from the side. A young woman, one of the guests who'd been silent until now. "Ben," she said softly, "maybe you should stop." Her tone carried quiet warning, not sympathy. Crow ignored her. He stepped closer to you instead. "You're in my house, boy. I make the rules here." You stared back, unflinching. "Rules?" You repeated, your voice barely above a whisper. "I'll remember that." You and your mother walked out under the weight of every watching eye. The laughter didn't follow this time. Only silence trailed you through the marble corridor, down the wide staircase, past portraits of men who'd bought their respect rather than earned it. Outside, the night air felt heavy with something unspoken. Your mother clutched your hand, her voice breaking as she said, "You shouldn't have pushed him, baby." People like that need to be reminded they bleed," you said. She stared at you, startled by your tone. But you weren't angry anymore. You were remembering the lessons your father had given you on nights when the world was smaller, but just as cruel. "They'll underestimate you," he'd said once as he slid cards across a cracked motel table. "Let them. When their laughter gets loud, that's when their guard drops." You hadn't realized how right he was until tonight. As you walked toward the gates, a black car rolled past slowly. Inside, the same woman who'd spoken at the table watched you through tinted glass. Her window lowered just enough for her voice to reach. "You should keep that card," she said. "It opens more than you think." Then the window slid up and she was gone. You looked down at your hand, at the black centurion card gleaming under the streetlight. The embossed name read, Benedict Crow, but beneath it was something stranger, a faint symbol in silver ink, the same insignia from your father's old company. The one that disappeared after Crow's merger, the one that destroyed your family's future. That night, in the small apartment you called home, you laid the card beside your father's bronze folder. The seals matched. You ran your finger along the edge of the folder until it clicked open. Inside lay old documents, transfer rights, pending patents, and one contract bearing both your father's and Crow's signatures. The fine print glimmered faintly, the ink catching the lamplight like a quiet accusation. You understood now. Crow hadn't just ruined your father's business. He'd stolen it. The merger had been theft disguised as paperwork, and your father's quiet resignation hadn't been weakness. It had been calculation. He'd left something unfinished, something waiting for the right hand to play it. You closed the folder and looked out the window toward the city skyline. Somewhere up there, in towers of glass and arrogance, Benedict Crowe slept soundly, believing the world still bowed to his name. But power has a way of shifting in silence, and the next move would be yours. But what came next silenced the entire room. Morning came like an unwanted witness. The city was loud, indifferent, and golden at the edges, the kind of morning that made other people believe in fairness. But for you, it felt like the calm before an unspoken storm. Your mother moved quietly through the apartment, her uniform folded neatly on the chair, though she had no work to go to anymore. You could see the way her hands shook when she buttoned her blouse, muscle memory of servitude refusing to fade. She didn't look at you when she said, "Don't think about last night. That man has too much money to even remember our names." But she was wrong. Men like Benedict Crowe remembered every bruise they caused, not out of guilt, but pride. They counted humiliation as currency. You sat at the small table, the bronze folder open between your hands. The smell of old paper clung to your fingers like dust from buried secrets. Page after page revealed what your father must have tried to fight for. Stock transfers, partial ownerships, unfulfilled clauses, signatures that looked too neat to be honest. At the bottom, under a stapled packet, you found it. A rider agreement, unsigned, granting control of patents to the surviving legal heir of Matthew Cross. That was your father's name. Your name, however, wasn't on any paper, not yet. The black Centurion card lay beside the folder. You'd barely slept, turning it over in your hand through the night. Its edges were sharp, its design minimal, but when tilted under light, you saw faint microtext burned into the metal. Access level, executive. Something about it wasn't standard issue. You remembered the woman at the car window, her calm warning. It opens more than you think. Your mother broke the silence again. "Promise me you'll stay away from that man," she said softly. People like that forget who built their fortune. You cut in. She looked at you, and for the first time you saw not fear in her eyes, but exhaustion. Years of enduring quiet insults, polite slaps, and underpaid loyalty. "Your father tried to fight him," she whispered. "It cost him everything." "Then I'll finish what he started," you replied. Later that afternoon, you put on your father's old jacket, too large at the shoulders but still heavy with his scent. You slipped the platinum pin into the lapel. It wasn't decoration. It was a message, though no one yet knew its language. Downtown, Crowe's company tower rose like a monument to greed. Glass and steel caught the sun in long, blinding shards. You approached the security desk, your reflection bending across marble. The guard barely looked up. "Deliveries through the side entrance." "I'm not here for deliveries," you said, sliding the Centurion card onto the counter. The man frowned, scanned it through the machine, and straightened abruptly. His tone shifted. "One moment, sir." He picked up a phone, his posture changing to something close to respect. Within seconds, 2 escorts arrived. Not guards, but assistants in tailored suits. They didn't ask your name. They simply said, "Mr. Crowe is in a meeting. He'll see you now." You followed them through corridors that gleamed like gold-plated arrogance. Every surface was cold, perfect, untouched. On the walls hung portraits of Crowe shaking hands with governors, CEOs, presidents, the performance of legitimacy. The door to his office stood tall, dark wood with a bronze plate that read, "B. Crowe, Executive Chairman." Inside he was laughing, surrounded by 3 board members. When he saw you, the laughter faltered, then returned as a sneer. "Well, if it isn't my young prodigy," he said. "What, here to cash in that toy card?" You stepped forward, calm. "You said winner takes it all. I'm just here to see what all means." The board members exchanged glances, half amused, half confused. Crowe leaned back, spreading his arms. "You've got guts, kid. I'll give you that. But let me teach you something. The world runs on paper, not pride." You smiled faintly. "Then maybe you should have read the fine print." You placed the bronze folder on his desk. He looked down, then up, his amusement thinning. "What's this?" "My father's company," you said. "The one you acquired, under false merger terms. You remember him. Matthew Cross." Crowe blinked slowly, then laughed again. "That's ancient history. Your father signed willingly." "He didn't sign the rider," you said, tapping the last page. "And according to your own company charter, that means his patents revert to his heir. That would be me." Silence. One of the board members reached forward to flip a page. His eyes widened slightly. The others leaned closer. The quiet tension in the room thickened like fog. Crow's jaw clenched. "Even if that were true," he said, voice lower now, "you'd need proof of heirship, legal verification, and board approval. You're out of your depth." You reached into your jacket and pulled out a small document, notarized, sealed, bearing a platinum watermark that shimmered faintly under the light. "Already done," you said. The assistants had stopped pretending not to listen. Phones hovered. One of them was already recording behind his coffee cup. The moment was too sharp to ignore, too cinematic to let slip. Crow's laughter had turned into something brittle. "You think this gives you power here? You think paper changes your bloodline?" "No," you said evenly, "but it changes yours." He stood up, his voice rising. "Get out of my office before you what?" You interrupted, quiet but cutting. "Fire me. You already fired my mother. Maybe you should check which payroll you're on before you start shouting." The board members exchanged quick glances. One of them cleared his throat. He's not entirely wrong. If those patents revert, it changes your equity position." Crow turned red, his mouth open but no words coming out. For the first time you saw it, not rage but realization, the same kind that came to every man who thought his power was permanent. You gathered the folder, tucking it neatly under your arm. "This isn't about revenge," you said softly. "It's about balance." You started for the door, then paused. "But if you're still confused, I'll make it simple next time. I don't play games I can't win." Outside the glass walls, the city gleamed as if nothing had changed. But inside, everything had. The boardroom remained silent except for one whisper from the assistant who'd filmed it all. "He's the heir." That clip would travel before sunset, and by dawn the empire would begin to crack. But what came next silenced the entire room. That evening, the world began to whisper. What had started as a private insult in a millionaire's mansion now moved through corridors of power like static through wire. The video, the one the assistant had recorded, circulated quietly, first among employees, then to journalists who owed no loyalty to Benedict Crow. In less than 12 hours, the footage of you walking out of his office with calm defiance became a storm, waiting to break. Crow didn't know it yet, but the sound of his own arrogance had become evidence. You returned home to find your mother staring at the television, the muted screen showing the Crow Holdings logo above a news ticker that read, "Anonymous, source alleges fraud in acquisition." She turned to you, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What did you do?" she whispered. You didn't answer. You only placed the bronze folder on the kitchen counter and said, "I played my hand." Her voice trembled. "Baby, they don't let people like us win these games." You met her gaze. "That's because they don't expect us to know the rules." You spent that night awake studying documents, calling in the favors your father once earned among forgotten colleagues, lawyers, clerks, auditors. Each conversation opened another door. What you discovered wasn't just corruption. It was an entire system of theft buried beneath polite signatures. Crow hadn't only stolen your father's business. He'd built his empire by erasing men like him, one small enterprise at a time. Every company he merged with had the same fingerprints. Forged valuations, hidden riders, erased heirs. By dawn, you had proof. You didn't need to shout. You only needed to show up again. The next morning, you walked into the Crow Holdings lobby in a suit that wasn't expensive but fit like purpose. The same guard who once dismissed you straightened when he saw the platinum pin glinting on your lapel. "Mr. Crow isn't expecting you," he said cautiously. "He should be," you replied, sliding a document across the counter. "This is a notice of audit, filed under federal oversight." Within minutes, chaos rippled upward. Phones rang. Assistants rushed. Board members began arriving in sleek cars, faces pale under their confidence. You watched from a distance as the building began to devour its own calm. Inside the boardroom, Crow's composure had started to fracture. He barked orders, pacing like a cornered animal. "Find out who leaked it! Call legal. Call the press!" But no one moved quickly enough. The footage had already gone public. Dozens of outlets quoting an unnamed heir to a wrongfully merged company. The headline wasn't just scandal. It was humiliation. When you entered, he slammed a fist against the table. "You think this is clever? You think this makes you powerful?" "I don't think," you said, closing the door behind you. "I verify." You placed a single document in front of him. the signed confirmation from the Federal Trade Authority, acknowledging the pending fraud investigation. Crow's face drained of color. "You went to the government," he hissed. "You tilted your head. You taught me something the night you slapped my mother," you said quietly. "You told me the world belongs to those who write the rules, so I learned to read them." One of the directors cleared his throat. "Ben," he said softly, "the investigation's out of our hands now. If they find what this kid's saying, not if, when, you interrupted. The files are public. I sent them to every regulatory body tied to your portfolio. The game's over." Crow stared at you for a long, shaking moment. Then, with the slow disbelief of a man watching his own legend collapse, he whispered, "You have no idea what you've started." You leaned forward slightly. "No, Mr. Crow. You started it the moment you turned my family into a punchline." There was no shouting after that, only silence thick enough to hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant clicking of cameras outside the frosted glass. Reporters had already gathered in the lobby. Security feeds caught everything. Crow's trembling hands, the documents laid bare, the boy he'd mocked now dictating his downfall with unflinching calm. As you turned to leave, the same assistant who'd filmed your last visit caught your eye. He nodded once, an unspoken salute. Justice wasn't loud. It was efficient. You paused at the doorway and looked back one final time. "You once told me to know my place," you said, voice steady. "Now you'll learn yours." Crow didn't answer. He only sank into his chair, surrounded by men who suddenly found other things to look at. The empire he'd built on humiliation and deceit had begun to crumble, not with an explosion, but with quiet inevitability. Outside, as cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions, you didn't speak. You just adjusted the platinum pin on your lapel and walked through the sea of lights. The city noise returned, blending with the echo of your father's old words. Never raise your hand, raise your evidence. The lesson was complete. By evening, the story had evolved from scandal to spectacle. Every major outlet ran the same headline in different fonts. The Maid's son who outsmarted a billionaire. They framed it like folklore, a modern fable where arrogance finally met its architect. Crow Holdings stock plunged by midday, its board scrambling to contain what they called a coordinated misinformation attack. But no statement could compete with the truth already living online. The video of that poker game, the humiliating slap, and your quiet, devastating victory at the table. The world had witnessed it all. Crow's mansion, once the site of laughter and unchecked power, now became a fortress of panic. He'd called emergency meetings, threatened lawsuits, even tried to spin the narrative that you'd forged everything. But the federal investigation was already public, and regulators weren't swayed by pride. The same bronze seal that once sat near his chair now appeared stamped across subpoenas. You didn't hide. You didn't need to. You met with attorneys in glass offices overlooking the same skyline that had once looked unreachable. Every document you brought forth, every clause your father had hidden like seeds in the soil, grew into evidence that now strangled Crow's empire. Still, there was one thing left unfinished. A final card you hadn't played. You returned to the mansion at dusk. The same gates that once denied you now opened without question. Security had new orders. Inside, silence had replaced the usual noise. No guests, no laughter, no music. Only the ticking of an antique clock echoing through the marble hall. You walked through corridors lined with portraits of ancestors, whose wealth had come from the backs of men, like your father. Crow was in his study, a decanter of whiskey trembling in his hand. He looked smaller now, his tailored suit hanging loose around him, his eyes hollow from sleeplessness. "You've ruined everything," he said. His voice cracked between rage and defeat. You stepped closer, calm. "No, Mr. Crow. I just showed everyone what you really built everything on." He slammed his glass down. "You think they'll hand it all to you? You're still nothing. They'll never let someone like you run what I created." You smiled faintly. "You didn't create it. You stole it. And the people who matter already know that." He laughed bitterly. "You think a few documents and a viral clip will change legacy?" You reached into your pocket and placed the platinum pin on his desk. It gleamed under the lamplight, the same symbol etched into your father's old folder, the emblem of the original Cross Technologies, the company Crow had devoured. "This isn't about legacy," you said quietly. "It's about reclamation. Crow stared at the pin, the color draining from his face. You can't possibly. But you cut him off, sliding a new folder toward him. This one bound in fresh leather and sealed with your own signature. Effective immediately. All assets derived from cross-patents revert under independent trust management. That includes your research division, your logistics chain, and your investment accounts. You'll remain as a consultant if approved. He blinked rapidly, confusion giving way to disbelief. Consultant? You nodded. At minimum wage. Consider it poetic. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then he whispered, "You've destroyed me." You leaned forward, your tone calm, deliberate. "No, I just stopped you from destroying anyone else." He turned away, staring out the window at the city he used to own. Outside, flashes from reporters' cameras cut through the darkness. The world had turned its gaze inward onto him, the once untouchable billionaire brought down by his own arrogance. You straightened your jacket and walked toward the door. Behind you, Crow spoke again, voice barely audible. "You could have asked for money. You could have settled quietly." You paused, "And let you buy silence again?" "No, some debts don't get paid in cash." The last thing he saw before you left was the platinum pin, gleaming cold and steady against the dark mahogany. A symbol not of wealth, but of correction. Outside, the night air felt different. Not victorious, just honest. Somewhere behind you, the mansion that once echoed with arrogance now trembled under its own guilt. And as you stepped into the waiting car, your mother's voice came back to you. Not a warning this time, but a memory. When they call you boy, remember, kings don't announce themselves. They're recognized. You looked out the window as the mansion disappeared behind a line of trees. Crow's empire had begun to collapse not with fire or noise, but with the same precision that once defined his cruelty. Every frozen account, every board resignation, every revoked contract, they would all be headlines by morning. Some victories aren't loud, they're surgical. And yours had just begun. By the next sunrise, Crow's empire was no longer his. The markets opened to chaos, stocks tumbling, investors pulling out, subsidiaries filing emergency statements. The same people who once toasted him at gala tables now spoke his name in past tense. His portrait was quietly removed from the corporate homepage, replaced by a temporary press banner reading, "Ongoing restructuring in progress." But you didn't celebrate. Power wasn't new to you, it was just finally visible. You sat alone in the board's top-floor office, looking down at the city that once looked down on you. The room was quiet, except for the hum of servers and the faint clinking of your father's platinum pin against the glass table. Across the street, cameras flashed outside Crow's former headquarters. The same reporters who once begged for his quotes now hunted for your face. But you didn't give them that satisfaction. You'd already learned from your mother that silence carried more weight than explanation. When asked for comment, you released a single statement. Some games should never have been played. It was short, deliberate, and sharp enough to become a headline by itself. Meanwhile, Crow had vanished from public view. Rumors said he'd fled to his estate upstate, surrounded by lawyers, drowning in lawsuits and letters marked urgency. A photo leaked. Him outside his home, unshaven, phone pressed to his ear, looking every bit like a man watching his fortune disintegrate. The caption underneath read, "When power meets its proof." You spent that afternoon meeting with auditors and legal teams. For every document your father had hidden, another truth unraveled. Crow's empire wasn't just stolen. It was built on unpaid labor, shell companies, and exploited families. Each name you read from the files was another story like yours. Men and women stripped of legacy, their signatures twisted into silence. You didn't just want Crow to lose. You wanted them to be restored, and so for every stolen patent and property uncovered, you ordered restitution. The board resisted at first. Old money doesn't yield easily. But when they saw your backing, your calm resolve, and the federal oversight breathing down their necks, they caved. By dusk, the corporate structure had been rewritten. Accounts frozen. New leadership pending. Crow Holdings would be reborn, not under his name, but under a new banner. Cross Equity Trust. Your father's initials reworked into the logo. And at the top of every contract, embossed in platinum ink, was the symbol from your pin. Two hands meeting, equal, unbroken. When the news broke, it didn't need embellishment. The narrative was perfect on its own. The billionaire who mocked a maid's son at his mansion, forced to watch that same boy inherit his empire. It was the kind of symmetry the world rarely gave, the kind that made people believe karma wasn't myth. Crow's friends disappeared, his partners withdrew, and the few who dared to defend him did so in whispers, careful not to be heard by those still holding cameras. That night, you visited your father's grave for the first time in years. The marble was cold, the engraved name faint from time. You brushed the dust from the letters, setting the bronze folder beside the headstone. "It's done," you said quietly. "He can't hurt anyone else." The city lights blinked in the distance, small and unimportant now. You reached into your pocket, feeling the Centurion card one last time. It was useless to you now, its balance frozen, its owner disgraced. Still, you left it on the grave, a relic of the night the world tried to remind you of your place. You looked up at the stars, the same ones that had watched over your mother scrubbing floors, your father signing doomed papers, you sitting quietly at a rigged poker table. And for the first time, you didn't feel smaller beneath them. Back in the city, Crow's last statement leaked to the press, a desperate letter to his board scrawled in haste, "You can't erase me. I built this world." But you knew the truth. The world didn't need erasing, it just needed remembering. And by the time morning came, Crow's mansion had gone up for auction. The bid was anonymous, though everyone whispered your name. Power had returned home. The world watched in disbelief as Crow's empire disintegrated piece by piece. Every hour brought a new headline. Federal charges filed against former billionaire. Board members under investigation. Assets seized pending inquiry. The man who once defined untouchable wealth was now a cautionary tale whispered in conference rooms and investor calls. Behind every report there was a photo of him, unshaven, shoulders bent, a ghost of arrogance fading under the weight of consequence. It didn't happen overnight, but collapse rarely does. It creeps quietly, collecting every arrogance, every slight, every injustice until gravity wins. You didn't have to speak anymore. Your silence had become its own language. The world knew who you were now, the boy who'd been mocked at a poker table, the son of a maid and a man who died believing his legacy lost. Yet you moved through it all without vanity. Your steps deliberate, your voice controlled. When the first board meeting of Sandy Cross-Equity Trust Heist convened, you sat at the head of the same mahogany table, where Crow had once mocked your father's worth. This time no one laughed. The room waited for you to speak, the air heavy with awareness. You looked around, eyes steady. "This company doesn't build on people," you began. "It builds with them. Anyone who can't live with that truth can leave now." No one moved. No one dared. You placed the bronze folder in front of you, not as evidence anymore, but as inheritance. "My father built this," you said softly, "and men like Benedict Crow tried to bury it. We're not burying anyone else." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous. It was quiet, genuine, like the kind given to something sacred finally restored. Outside, protests formed, not against you, but for the people your father's work had once lifted. Former employees of Crow Holdings, factory workers, small business owners, all of them now had their stories told alongside yours. Their faces filled the screens, their voices replacing the sterile corporate noise that had once echoed through Crow's empire. Justice wasn't just poetic anymore, it was operational. Meanwhile, Crow himself faced the kind of scrutiny he used to purchase immunity from. The investigation uncovered offshore accounts, falsified audits, and years of unethical acquisitions. Every luxury asset he owned, from cars to condos, was liquidated to cover restitution. When he finally appeared in court, dressed not in Armani but in the plain gray suit of consequence, he didn't look at you. But you were there, seated quietly in the back row beside your mother. The same woman he'd once humiliated now watched him tremble before a judge. When the verdict came, 5 years imprisonment for corporate fraud and restitution exceeding $1 billion, he didn't react. He simply stared at the judge as if realizing too late that power had always been borrowed, not earned. As the officers let him out, you stood. For a second his eyes met yours, and though he said nothing, the silence between you said everything, the slap, the laughter, the arrogance. It had all led to this. Outside the courthouse, the air was thick with flashbulbs. Reporters shouted questions you didn't answer. You helped your mother into the waiting car, shielding her from the noise. She turned to you, her voice trembling. You did what I told you not to. You smiled faintly. You told me to survive. I just made sure we wouldn't have to do it quietly anymore. She held your hand, eyes glistening. Your father would be proud. You looked out the window as the city blurred past, the courthouse shrinking behind you. Somewhere in that building, Crow sat in a holding cell, stripped of the luxury that once defined him. His mansion, his name, his legacy, all gone. The same world that cheered his cruelty now studied his fall like a warning carved in stone. That night you returned to the poker table. Not the one from that night, but a replica you'd kept as a reminder. You laid out the cards slowly. A full house on one side, a straight flush on the other. You smiled faintly. The lesson had never been about luck. It had always been about patience. You stood, leaving the platinum pin on the table under the glow of a single lamp. It gleamed against the felt, small yet eternal. Power didn't roar, it whispered. And yours whispered justice. Some lessons cost millions. For him, one slap cost everything. Stories like these happen every day. Subscribe to never miss the truth behind the power. The city eventually moved on, as cities do. Headlines faded, new scandals bloomed, and the world's appetite for outrage found fresh faces. But for you, the silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was balance restored. The mansion was sold, the debts repaid, and the people your father once worked beside finally received the recognition they were denied. Your mother no longer wore a uniform. She wore peace. Some nights you caught her humming while cooking, her laughter soft and whole again. You kept the bronze folder locked away, not as proof anymore, but as memory. The platinum pin sat framed on your desk, its glint a quiet reminder that power, when earned, doesn't need to shout. Sometimes when the city lights blinked across your window, you'd think of that poker table, the laughter, the slap, and how everything turned with one calm hand. You'd smile, not in triumph, but in understanding. Because in the end, justice isn't loud, it's steady. And for the first time in generations, the world was finally listening. Stories like these happen every day. Subscribe to never miss the truth behind the power.